Hello and welcome to the webinar 5 Take Action Strategies to Engage Millennial Consumers. Thanks so much for joining us. Very excited to have you. We're going to delay just maybe 30 seconds here to make sure we have everyone joining on. Make sure those stragglers dial in. My name is Tim Dreyer. I'm the Director of Public and Analyst Relations here at Aspect Software. Thanks for joining. Because this topic is so current and very interesting, I think we're going to have a very engaging conversation between our two speakers today, Jason Dorsey and Joe Gagnon, because these are issues that are facing any consumer-facing company today. I think we'll find this very relevant. But before we get started, I want to take just a few seconds for housekeeping items. If you care to share what you hear today, please use our event hashtag AspectTake5. That's AspectTake and the number 5. If you are listening after this broadcast, feel free to use that hashtag as well. By default, you've joined the webinar listening through your computer speaker system, so if you'd like to call in using your phone, just locate the audio pane and select Use Telephone, and dial in information and access code will be displayed there. You'll also have the ability to ask questions using the questions pane on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and click send. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have some time to respond to those questions. And if you are, of course, listening after our live broadcast, you can tweet those questions using our Aspect Software Twitter handle. That's Aspect Software. And, of course, use that hashtag as well, AspectTake5. So now that I've gone through the housekeeping items, let me introduce our first speaker, Joe Gagnon, who is not just an endurance athlete, he is an endurance individual. Joe has 30-plus years of business strategy and technology experience, primarily running SaaS-based. Hang on a sec here. How's that? Joe has been published in national periodicals from New York Times to Inc. magazine and has been seen on the History Channel, CNN, and Fox News Live. He's also, over the past 12 years, logged over 125,000 miles and completed 5 Ironman races and 7 ultra marathons. And these two activities come together on his blog, The High Performance Life, where he shares techniques for mental toughness, creative problem solving, and leadership and personal effectiveness, where mind, body, and soul come together. And he regularly applies this thinking when he engages with Aspect customers to develop inspiring and mutually beneficial consumer engagement strategies. He does all this formally as Aspect's SVP and General Manager of Aspect's Cloud Solutions. So Joe, let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
Wow, Tim, that was pretty fun. Sometimes always tough listening to people describe yourself, but you know, you need to sort of be out in the world, living, touching, and feeling it if you're going to come up with strategies that will fit, you know, for this ever-changing world. And so, you know, in working as a leader of our cloud business, but really driving the idea of how to better engage and provide capability to engage with consumers, Aspect decided that what we would do is to get out into the market and talk directly to consumers and build out a survey and then take those insights and help use them to help us drive our strategy. You know, we think that there's a couple of sort of key foundational elements to this. One is the idea of, you know, consumers have questions, it's hard to get answers. How are you going to do that going forward? And how do you do that if you're a millennial or any generation for that matter? We think that, you know, customers all want to be surprised and delighted. They want happier and better outcomes, and too often our current environment fails them. And it fails them really because they have not been engaging with the consumer. It's sort of a one-way dialogue. It's the dead-end message. It's the please do not reply, none of which really makes us feel very good as a consumer. In the future, having conversational messages, engagement is the form of being active and participative in the outcomes that you want to create. And then overall, just sort of putting effort into something gets you closer and closer to that. And so as we move to the next page, you know, we started to think about we can, by defining a new set of capabilities, drive new models. And, you know, in partnering with Jason Dorsey, a buddy of mine for the past 8 years, He and I have been bantering back and forth about this. I dare say it's hard to admit that I'm a baby boomer and he's a millennial, but there is a lot of commonality in our thought, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jason, who with us partnered to drive this project and build these insights. Jason, back over to you.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. I'm so glad that you're here with us. It is going to be an awesome webinar. Thank you guys for logging in around your lunchtime. We're going to try to give you some energy, some nourishment, insights, some fun things that you can leave and do based on our latest research. This is not going to be a boring webinar. If it's boring, I'm leaving the webinar too. So stay in there with me. What I'm going to ask you to do is a few things before we get started. The first is make sure you have something handy to take notes. If you're a millennial, you want to take it on your phone. If you're a baby boomer and you got a notepad and a pen, ooh, busted, definitely grab that. Whatever it is, if you're a CEO and you have your assistant, that would be fine too. Whatever you have, it would be great to get those out. I would also encourage you, Joe and I are very, very big believers in engagement. We're big believers in conversations, not talking to people. And so we would love for you to log on to Twitter and use one of the either the hashtags or use our Twitter handle. So I'll give you a moment to do that. I'm at Jason Dorsey, and I pushed out through you guys so you could see. Joe is at THPL Life, and then of course Aspect Software is at Aspect Software, and our hashtag is #AspectTake5, the number 5. So definitely grab whatever you're going to take notes with. We're going to go fast. We got a lot to cover. We don't believe in wasting your time. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in this webinar. So definitely whatever you need to do to make the most of it, please make sure and get that handy so we can get started. Okay, now that we're all ready to go, share with you a little bit about me. I know many of you already know who I am because you're blowing me up on Twitter right now. My favorite tweet so far says, Jason, half my office is listening to the webinar. Whoop, whoop. That's what I'm talking about. That's how we roll. Now we just got to get the other half. So what do you need to know about me to give you a little context for not only the work that we do, but our relationship with Aspect and my admiration for Joe and a lot of his pioneering work around engagement. So I am Jason Dorsey. I'm a co-founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics, and all we do is study generations, how they're created, where they're trending, and what do we believe they're going to be doing in the future. And we do that so companies like your own can make better decisions now, whether that's on the employment side, whether that's on the marketing side, whether that's on customer service and engagement. We're all about looking at these things through a generational lens and really bringing data to the conversation. You know, I love a great story. I love the fact that, you know, a boomer will call their millennial kid 5 times, get no response, and then they send a text and wham, you know, instant reply. But we also want to get into the data behind that. Why does that happen? Is that true? Is it not true? Really dig into that, and that's what we do at our center. I lead our research practice, and we do millennials research. I think what's important, though, is that we don't just research millennials in a vacuum. We're all about generational context. I know many of you saw me in the New York Times article, I think it was about a week and a half ago. It was a cover story, and really what I did is talk about generational context as the power. And so much about what we're going to be talking about today is going to be there. Shilpi, can you please go back one more slide? So when you think about kind of what we do at a high level, we're leading that research. And our clients are all the biggest Fortune 500 companies you can think of. We pretty much work with them. They're fabulous. I write several books, including lots of bestsellers, which has been fun. And I do many TV shows, which only matters to baby boomers. So there's like 60 Minutes, 2020, Today, Show View, lots of more. And as part of that, I got to keynote the fabulous Aspect Software Conference, which was just wonderful. These guys know how to put on a great event, and really start to preview up the research that we're actually going to share here on this webinar. This is the first time that the research will be shared publicly through a webinar environment, and we encourage you as we go to ask your questions, type your questions, and engage with us on it. But we are here to have that conversation with you. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. I'll share with you a little bit more about our center. So what makes us different and why we like working with Aspect so much is when we dig in and we do the research and we start to bring to life these insights, it's really important not just to give people data, but to give people how-to based on the data. And if you're a business owner, if you're an executive, I'm sure you've seen this or experienced this. Somebody shares with you great information, great insights. You go, okay, but what do I do with that? Okay, I get that millennials like the text, but I don't know what that really means. Or I know they want to engage with customer service differently, but how do I act on that? And so what Aspect is a big believer in, and what we're big believers in here at the center, is finding that missing link. Okay, we get this insight, but what do we actually do? So as you'll see when we conclude the webinar, we're going to be sharing with you some very specific strategies that you guys can customize, you can make it your own, and you can start doing them right away. Because without strategies, it's a nice conversation, but it doesn't necessarily drive results. And as I shared, we work with all kinds of big brands, but the bottom line is this. You know, at our center, my personal mission is to bring to life these generational differences so we can better bridge those generations. We can be more effective as leaders, as communicators, as marketers, as customer service professionals, really trying to unlock the value of every single generation. And that's what we're going to do on our time together. So let's jump into it. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what are we going to cover? Hey, look at that, everybody. Make sure you zoom in real close and look at Joe versus me. The beauty of this wonderful photo here is that I have on a jacket and Joe, my baby boomer friend, does not. So we'll talk about some of these generational differences. And in this webinar, what are we going to cover? The truth about millennials, because there's a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of things that aren't true, and there's a lot of myths, and we need to debunk those. We're going to talk about the other generations, because as you'll hear me talk about quite a bit, and Joe and I are big believers in this, it's not about a single generation in a vacuum. None of us probably serve only one generation of customers or clients or even employees. It's always about generational context. And then we're going to break down the new national research. And you'll see as we go through it, we look at it in a lot of different angles. And the reason is we need those different perspectives, those different lenses to really bring to life the challenge and the opportunity. And I think our research did that really well. We'll share these 5 take action strategies that are based on the actual research findings. And then my favorite part, live Q&A. So you'll be able to ask whatever question you want. Tim, our wonderful colleague here, will be able to sort through those, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end to the best of our ability. And any questions we do not answer, or any question that is on your mind, either type it into the webinar technology we're using, the GoToWebinar, and as a question, or just post it on Twitter. Twitter's the easiest for me. I've got the Twitter stream open right now, so I'm watching all of these come through. So at Jason Dorsey, or at THPL Live, or at Aspect Software, be sure to use our hashtag, and we will hit you back. Okay, Shilpi, next slide, please. Oh, I love these tweets, by the way, guys. These are awesome. So as I look right here, must-know facts about millennials. We're going to take a little bit of time before we get into the research to make sure we explain each generation. And the reason is, when we did the research, we did it through a generational lens. And without explaining each of the generations, it's hard sometimes to understand who we're talking about, or we think that, say, for example, millennials are a different age and so forth. So I want to start with kind of the must-know high-level facts about millennials. Before I go into these facts, what I want to clear up is one quick thing, which is the name of the generation. You may be wondering, what do we call this generation? Are they millennials? Are they Gen Y, Net Gen, Digital Gen, Facebook Gen, Gen 2.0, whatever the name is? You can use whatever name you want. In our work, consulting and doing strategy around the world, millennials is the more common name in the U.S., but everywhere else that we work, the more common or more popular name is Generation Y. The key thing to know as you think about what we're going to share is that it's the exact same generation. And in our work, when we look at generations, we're really looking at predictability by scenario. How likely is a certain generation or group of people born around the same time to have a similar response or reaction in a certain situation, whether that's customer service, asking a question, you name it. So when we look at generations, when we think about millennials, the birth years we're using are 1977 to 1995. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat that those birth years, they can swing about 5 years on either way. So if you're born, for example, in 75, you might be more millennial than Gen X. Or if you were born in 1980, you might be more Gen X than millennials. Has a lot to do with the trends that shape generations. But a good starting place is just 1977 to 1995. Millennials in the U.S. number about 80 million. You know, depending on how you look at it, roughly 79.8 million. They're the most diverse generation in U.S. history. This is a huge deal that I think is lost sometimes in customer service or customer engagement. But that diversity creates all kinds of different norms in terms of how we want to engage in a customer service experience. So we want to be sensitive to the fact that millennials are so diverse that we don't even see diversity sometimes unless it's absent. And what you'll see is we wanted diversity in our choices to really fit us. We are the fastest growing generation of consumers in the U.S. marketplace. When people say, why should we care about millennials? Aren't they broke and all that stuff? As you'll see, it's just totally not true. Millennials have a lot of money to spend. We're going to keep having more money to spend, and whoever wins us wins in a huge, huge way. In terms of must-know characteristics, we're experiencing delayed adulthood, which means we want the freedom of being an adult without the responsibility. You've probably seen this, the 28-year-old that doesn't pay their own bills or lives with their parents or doesn't feel they have to get a job. They're delaying what are called the traditional or gateway markers to adulthood. So they're pushing all that back. So a lot of times when we interview millennials and say, at what point are you officially an adult, line in the sand, you own it, you're grown up, no more excuses, you have to pay all your own bills, you can't live with your parents, and you should have a job. At what point is the line in the sand? Many millennials will say the age 30. So where other generations thought maybe that was 18, a lot of millennials we see say it's happening much later when they have to take ownership or responsibility for all their decisions, their finances, their jobs, their relationships, and so forth. Now, conversely to that, or the flip side is, because we're such a big generation, there's 80 million of us, we're entering this wealth accumulation phase. And what that means is the 18 or 19 to 37 demographic is when we finally start to make a lot of money. So being such a big generation, there's a lot of us that certainly aren't creating the real world traction that we want. But there's a huge percentage of us that are out there, that are generating income, that are spending money, and so forth. Let me talk more about that. So we have to always weigh that, yes, we're hitting these life markers later, but many of us, because we're so big, we're still generating on the whole a huge amount of money. And whichever brands figure out how to engage us correctly are going to win, and they're going to win big. And we'll talk more about this as we go. Next slide, please. Oh, and I get it fired up if you haven't figured that out. So feel free to hit me on Twitter. I love that. So when we look at why focus on millennials now, these are kind of just 5 that jump out at me. Number 1, millennials tend to be the leading indicator for every other generation. And the reason is millennials have been the youngest generation. So what they did first, other generations eventually did. I was on Facebook well before my mom is. Now my mom's on Facebook more than me. In fact, she's on Facebook so much, millennials are leaving Facebook. So if you look at that youngest group, they tend to be the tech adopters that then cause the other generations to follow suit. Millennials also have the greatest lifetime value of any customer you can win today, period. Our center is pretty special because we work across so many different industries, whether that's, automotive, life insurance, retail, restaurants, consumer packaged goods, you name it. And what's interesting in all of them is millennials still have the greatest lifetime value of any customer. When Joe and I were working on the study, one of the things that was so important is we wanted to ask questions that were applicable in virtually every industry and every vertical, and I think we achieved that. And part of the reason was every industry is seeing this in different ways. Sure, retail experiences earlier, and now maybe it's life insurance, but the idea is they're still dealing with the same scenario, and it's increasingly happening. We have the least established customer customer loyalty, and that's important because many of you may have seen on TV, and people are always arguing millennials are so disloyal, and it's just not true. What we actually are is we have the least established loyalty. We're still sampling. Because we're entering adulthood later and we're making all these traditional even purchases of adulthood later, cars, homes, and so forth, people assume we're disloyal when the reality is we're just getting a later start. So we're sampling much later at an older age. And so somebody goes, well, by the time I was 28, I already had bought 3 cars and I already knew my, insurance agent and yada, yada, yada. Well, the reality is that millennial may have not done any of those themselves. Maybe their parents helped them the whole time. So we're still sampling. What we find, in fact, is that millennials are incredibly loyal customers, incredibly loyal once they determine who they want to be loyal to. And that's really the power of getting engagement right. Millennials are also entering the wealth accumulation phase. So we're finally making more money. And the most important thing for virtually every brand that we work with is that millennials will outspend boomers, this is in the U.S., in 2017. And at that moment, the paths really diverge, and millennials continue to outspend boomers going forward. Because remember, they're about the same size as baby boomers, millennials to boomers, in terms of the size of the generation, but millennials are making more and more and more money, and they're spending more and more money. So let's pause for a second and answer a quick question on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter yet, this is your chance to do it. Randy asks, that range of years for millennials is broader than I've seen before. Is this the consensus among experts? So there is no consensus among experts. I think it's the right answer. We use 77 to 95 because we're looking at predictability by scenario. You will see people say 1980 to 2000. Randy, one thing I can tell you is that millennials absolutely do not go to 2000. And the reason is the most important event that shaped the generation is September the 11th, 2001. You cannot be born after 1995 and process the significance of 9/11/2001 in the way those born before 1995 do. In terms of the starting year, that 1977, you're going to see that go from 77 to 82, just depends who you're looking at. Nielsen uses the same years we do. Big ratings company is 77 to 95. So remember, they're not really a line in the sand except for maybe 95 because September 11th was such a pronounced event, really a generation-defining moment. So thanks for that question. If you have questions, make sure you post them on Twitter so we can see them. Let's jump to that next slide. And thanks for the most engaging and informative webinar tweet out there. Thank you for that, guys. We're going to keep it fun. Intro to the other generations. Now, you may remember me saying that we don't just want to talk about millennials in a vacuum, and that's because the real power of generations is putting generations in context. It's the context that shows you what's not working, what's working, and why. So let's jump real quick into the other three generations. If we could see the next slide, please, and we'll start to bring these to life. So the generation before millennials is called Generation X. And Gen X was born about 1965 to 1976. Remember, you can be a cusper on either side, but that's generally the range you would have. This generation, Gen X, is known for being naturally skeptical. Their attitudes, actions speak louder than words. They're the ones that always want to see my data. You know? So Gen X is the one right before millennials. In fact, when we look at working together, the big conflict right now is millennials to Generation X. So as you think about this, keep in mind, Gen X is a group right before millennials. The difference a lot of times between Gen X and boomers is boomers are born 46 to 64, and their defining characteristic, this is millennials' parents, are baby boomers. Baby boomers' defining characteristics is they define work ethic in hours per week. They believe in policies and procedures and protocol, you know. You must use a fax cover sheet. So boomers are the ones that Gen X has been bumping into. Gen X came of age when there was all kind of historical promises and so forth broken. You may remember things like government scandals and mass layoffs and wars and all this kind of stuff. Divorce rate goes through the roof. These are big macro things that Gen X dealt with. Boomers entered before all of that. They came of age, and we believe, you know, personally at the center, and Joe and I've talked about this a lot, we believe baby boomers might actually be two different generations within that 46 to 64 time period. You know, that's kind of the generally accepted time period, but we believe that older boomers have some different characteristics because they experienced some fundamentally different events than, say, the latter baby boomers did. The latter baby boomers were really more 70s kids. And then we get to traditionalists, and this is my grandparents' generation. So if you're to think about it, Gen X's generation right before me, I'm a millennial. Baby boomers are my mom and dad, and they are boomers to a T, you know. And then we get to traditionalists, which is my grandparents' generation. As you think about the traditionalists, one or two quick things that really jump out. The first is they have an incredibly strong military connection. Both of my grandfathers fought in World War II. The one that I was closest to, who I miss terribly every single day, I would ask him, I'd say, Grandpa, tell me about the war. And all he would say is, we left a lot of good people behind. You know, and that was very much indicative of his generation. Traditionalists also grew up around the Great Depression. You know, both of my grandparents grew up through the Great Depression in New York City. And because of the Great Depression, you see that traditionalists are very comfortable with delayed gratification, which is different than what we see with millennials who are more instant gratification, or at the very least much more outcome driven. So just at a high level, there's Gen X, boomers, and traditionalists. You can go find additional information about these on our website, or you can see it in the books, or you can also see it in the special report that we put together where we break this down a little bit more too. So feel free to go to any of those resources. If you haven't hit me on Twitter yet, make sure you do it. We're looking for you. May we go to the next slide, please? So an overview of our national study. What I want to do now is just give you a sense of our study and what we did. Now, I know some of you, at least one of the posts here on Twitter says, Jason, how would you collect data to look at these numbers? And so what we do is you do a national study that mirrors the U.S. Census. So here we go. Mirrors U.S. Census. And so in this case, we surveyed about 1,000 adults ages 18 to 65. Gives you a nice cross-section of the generation. And we oversampled millennials. And a simple way to think about that is by asking more millennials to answer the same questions, we can look at the millennials by themselves because that sample would be statistically valid. We can also look at the whole group across generations. If we didn't do an oversample of millennials, you can't dig as deeply into the millennials-only data, which I think is really important. So if you want to know about the confidence interval or the margin of error, it's plus or minus 3.1, 19 out of 20 times, and all that means is that this is considered basically the gold standard for national research study that's quant-based. So they answered the questions, we made sure that we got the right people in, and then we analyzed the data a whole bunch of different ways. So the bottom line is this is a fabulous snapshot of what America thinks around customer engagement at this moment in time, segmented, or not segmented, broken down by generation. A segmentation study is very different. We did not want to do that. So we'll be able to compare each generation based on the data as Joe and I go through it. So as we go into the findings, I want to make sure and throw it over to Joe to be able to bring to life not just what we found, but also what we did. May we go to the next slide, please? Da-da-da-da, what the research uncovered. All right, Joe, take it away, my friend.
Hey, Jason, thanks very much. I did want to ask, is it possible to be a closet millennial? Bring the attributes of all of that it means in the generation in the most positive way. So maybe we'll have some cross-generational kinds of things to mirror the rest of our world we live in. Anyway,
well,
so
you make a great point, though, Joe. I do want to add to that because you actually said something I think is really important, as usual. You brought it up, which is the idea that generations are not a box. And nobody's going to have all the characteristics of any one particular generation based on their birth year alone. But the generations, as you and I talk about so much, they're clues. And they're clues on where to start, on how to faster connect with and influence people of different ages. And in particular with engagement, looking at this through a generational lens, you can really see if there are differences. And if so, what are those differences? And then what can we do with them? So I think as you're going to share with these findings, you really found some pretty startling things. So let's go, Joe.
Yeah, so the thing that was really interesting, there's this, I've had the opportunity to run call centers and businesses, software companies, et cetera, and every time you go out and talk to consumers, your customers for that matter, I think you always come back with something that's very interesting and surprising. The thing that I was surprised at is how much the average American actually interacts with a customer service, person or capability. This 65 times seems like an extraordinary amount. And then if you add up the amount of time and the experience that we take away, we find that actually we're really not doing that well. And the bad part about that is that the customer experience is getting defined by customer service. Products, features, functions, capabilities are easy to copy. But the experience, the way you feel, how you engage, am I excited, do I know enough, all these things that are missing from that interaction, we're finding that is the defining capability that a company has. And so when you do say that customer service equals customer experience, you have an opportunity for differentiation. And what's great about that the research also told us, is that when you do that, when you actually meet this test of how a consumer thinks about you, if you can actually achieve that objective, then you can build loyalty, you can increase market basket size, you can drive up your net promoter score. There are many, many ways of getting a real return on this. So, in the past, we thought customer service was that thing in the background, and actually, we think over the next 5 years, it's going to move to the foreground, and every investment that anyone makes in customer service will translate into better results. Let's go to the next slide. If you think a little bit more deeply, it's like, so what is different about the generations and customer experience preferences and overall expectations is that many of the millennials, they grew up in a completely different era, as Jason described. I mean, typing with your thumbs was not something that baby boomers were trained when they went to elementary school. They didn't even know that that's what thumbs were for. But in fact, we have seen that, millennials like to communicate in different ways. That in fact we like to use text as a way to communicate in a customer service experience. That we really don't want to, if possible, actually engage over the phone. And so I think that, as we dig deeper and deeper into this, I think that, Jason has a couple other insights that I'll pass over to him because we both looked at this slightly differently. Jason, you want to jump in on this one as well? All right. Did we lose him?
See, that's what happens when I mute you.
There you go. Thanks.
Let's go to the millennials. So millennials, as Joe said, we're seeing these generational differences. What I think is important is that millennials, more than any other generation, 77%, this is really important. It's over 3/4 of the entire generation of 80 million, it's over 60 million people, think that customer service should be available in a wide variety of communication styles. And that's 10 points higher than baby boomers. This is a huge deal because millennials have come of age always being able to choose to engage with people in the way that they want. Like the expectation is, I've always been able to text my friend or reach them on IM or use Facebook or Snapchat or, pick one of 15 other things. And so the idea here is millennials expect choice when it comes to engaging with customer service and customer experience. And it's not even, I would say, an expectation. It's the idea that it's normal. And we get frustrated, and they will leave companies that don't offer them a way to engage in the way that they want to. I speak to a lot of companies, and I was just speaking with one, they said, oh man, Jason, we had 1 million phone calls last year we handled answering questions about our products. And I was like, well, how many text messages did you get, or how many IMs? They're like, oh, well, we don't do that. We pride ourselves on being able to answer the phone and resolve the question. I'm like, look, millennials don't have landlines. Many of us don't have our voicemail set up, and the last thing we want to do is actually call someone and talk to you. Like, that's crazy. That is an option when something's complicated, absolutely. But a quick question, man, I want to be able to use social media or some of these other ways to get there. And I think, Joe and I talk about this a lot with Aspect, is there are certain people and certain personas that still want to use the phone. There's certain people that want to do it face-to-face, and there's other people who their default immediate behavior is I want to send a text. And we need to be able to accommodate all of those effectively and efficiently, and in a cost-effective way, frankly, to be able to get the person the answer that they need. So just notice that millennials are so much higher than, for example, baby boomers when it comes to their expectations around this. The second part I thought struck me because, and I don't like to read slides to you, but I think it's good to read this one. Over 80% of Americans expect their customer service agent to be an expert, yet 70% of Americans feel that this is not the case. So why do you think that happens? Well, you and I both know. We call or we text, whatever it is we do, to reach out to, say, the airlines. We expect the person to be able to answer our problems quickly, get it right the first time, and if not, hand us off to somebody who we don't have to re-explain ourselves to, but instead we find out they don't have the answer that we need. So we have these high expectations, yet what we're encountering is that the experience we're getting is not up to our expectations again. The idea that the customer service agent, no matter how we connect with them, should be an expert, and if they can't answer the question immediately and correctly, they should be able to pass us off to somebody who can do that for us without having us to tell our whole situation again in that whole mess. So you get what I'm saying here. We expect the people we go to for help to be able to help us, and this is across generations. Remember, we talked about generational differences and even generational similarities. This is a huge similarity. To get 80% of America to answer any question in the same way is a pretty big deal. And then to get 70% to say, yeah, they're not actually doing it for us, just shows not only the problem that we have to solve, but the opportunity if we get it right. And the last one just really validates what we see, which is that millennials, more than any other generation, have moved away from at least one company because of bad customer service. This is important because if the youngest generation is the one that reveals the future to us, if it's the one that shows us future trends, like I'm on Facebook first, then my mom's on it, and then I end up leaving it, right? When you think about this, if millennials are the ones willing to leave because they're just not willing to put up with it, other generations are going to start to do the same thing. And we're already seeing this. In fact, you're probably already seeing this yourself. You know, your expectations have changed. They're probably increasing. And now we see millennials already leaving companies more than anybody else because of this. So get it right, you win us, you win big. If you don't get it right, it creates all kinds of challenges that will start to ripple up. So really, really great findings here in part 2. And I'm going to pass it back over to Joe to take us through findings part 3. And make sure to hit us on Twitter. Joe and I are responding right now. Maybe Joe hit the mute button too, because I don't hear you, Joe. Let's see if he comes back on. If not, I'm going to have to deliver the second part. Oh, is it still me? Look at that. It's still me. Findings part 2.
Yeah, I did the same
I
thing.
think it was payback.
Gotta love, yeah, this is still you anyway, Jason, but the mute button is, I think, stuck today. So why don't you finish up this page
well,
and I'll jump
in
on
one
number
together
3.
Because you and I
All right.
interpreted it differently. I thought that was fun. So the first one says 47% of millennials use their smartphone regularly to pay for things, which is more than 3 times the rate of baby boomers. You and I talk about this a lot. You're a technology guru. So do you think that baby boomers will start to use their phone regularly to pay for things in the way that millennials currently do?
Yeah, I think that we're actually just watching the technology be proven out and see how simple it is. I don't think there's a baby boomer who doesn't like simplicity in their life. We just didn't grow up with it. You know, this thing you've always talked about, Jason, which is that we're not actually tech savvy, we're tech dependent. I think that baby boomers are equally becoming tech dependent, even though they grew up in an era when they sort of thought they knew how it worked. Now it's integrated into our lives, and payment is something we do almost every day. There isn't any reason, you know, to spend more time than one needs to, especially with brands that really we enjoy using. And so I think it'll happen more and more.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I'm reading some tweets right now that correspond to what we're saying here. So 36% of millennials would contact a company more frequently if they could text them. That's 25 million customers. One of the things that Joe and I talk about a lot is the more positive contact you're able to create with your customers, the happier they are, the more they talk about you. I just saw this right here. Lisa posted on my Twitter at Jason Dorsey. She said, you must not be talking about at Southwest Air when you mention airline reps not being experts, right? So right there, here's Lisa saying, no, these people are experts. And when we find people that solve the problems for us, we want to tell everybody. Another tweet that's at Jason Dorsey as well, and at Aspect Software says, you know, as a millennial, I have to agree about the whole voicemail and telephone tip. Let me text or chat. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Give us that option. And then the last one, over 30% on the slides here, over 30% of all Americans would contact their company more frequently if texting were an option. What we're seeing, the bottom line is this. Millennials may be leading the charge, but other generations are now starting to look more like us. And let's take that into the next slide.
Jason, as we move on to the next slide, I would say the other additional point here is that we have seen the growth of messaging in the form of text, but that's outbound from someone to us. What we're talking about now is having the ability to go from us back to that brand we want to ask a question or engage with. But we also don't want it to only have to hit an agent. We have technology, as you know, right, that allows us to ask questions where the systems themselves can give us the answer back. So then we're not talking about just increasing the number of agents who can answer a question, but using that enterprise content and the right technology with natural language capability to be able to interpolate, give an answer, and satisfy that text without actually adding any substantive cost because there's no labor involved. So really profound opportunity once we see that the consumers want to do that to be able to satisfy their needs and to do it cost effectively. You know, which really connects back to this idea of self-service being sort of the primary way of improving customer service in the future. You know, as we dove into this, we had this as a thesis entering the research. We wanted to see if we could actually prove it. And what I was really surprised at was every generation is increasing their expectations for what customer service should be able to do. And I think this comes to because it's a more competitive world, because we're smarter, we just have raised the bar. You know, there's enough products and there's enough sort of commonality that if you can't give me good service, I have high expectations for you, well, then I'll go do something else. And that it actually happens fast, right? This is, you know, the world is flat. It's actually frictionless. It's moving around the world at the same speed and pace. It can happen instantly here as it could anywhere, India, China, Australia, around the world. Everything we found out, we believe, actually carries across the globe. that this idea of online customer service being the most preferred type of customer service, I think, saw just the leading edge of this, which is that people say that the phone call is number 2. The phone call will one day be probably number 5, because the only reason it's still high is that people don't realize there are alternatives. And the alternative cannot be an IVR, that thing that says push 1 for this, push 2 for that. Those only frustrate customers. There's so many better technological solutions that can help them. And then lastly, when you look at this and think about, that text, social media, the dramatic increase. We've only had these smartphones in our hands for 5 or 6 years. What's going to happen over the next 5 or 6 years, we can only imagine, with the Internet of Things and other devices and capability that are going to allow us to do things on our own in the context, in the middle of our life. And so, all in all, we're seeing that self-service, let me do it, do it on my own, fit it in my life, make me smarter, are all going to be, sort of the driving themes for improving customer service by allowing the consumer to do it on their own. Jason, I think I'll turn it back over to you for findings part 4.
Yeah, we'll go to the next slide.
Oh,
that's a continuation of this. So would you talk about the self-service piece, because I think that's so important in the way you bring it to life.
Yeah, I think that, what you see is that there is this idea of empowerment at the consumer level, where what our research told us is that the consumer feels better about themselves when they actually get to do the function, right? That we don't need any longer to be dependent on someone else to find us those things, the pieces of data that we actually want to find out on our own. It is actually quite rewarding. I mean, if you think about how people, live and learn, develop, we always want to do more, but sometimes we're not capable of it. And so here, when we empower you, because you now have this tool in your hand called a smartphone, because you have this capability that you've learned how to, sort of communicate with that device, and we have already the enterprise content available to you, there isn't any reason you need some agent or some other broker to get you to that information. And then when you're done, you feel really good about it. When we do this without talking to a person, we also become more efficient. We don't have to sort of translate the way we think. We can actually sort of navigate our ways there. And with millennial females at over 70% saying that they would rather solve the issue on their own rather than talking to a human, doesn't mean they're not social. It just means that they want to be empowered and feel better about themselves when they're done. And then this last point, looking ahead, 41% millennials say they'd rather be truly satisfied to use text messaging or SMS. That is because it's a natural language that they know how to use, they know how to control it. This big shift, I think one of the mega themes across this really comes down to that we want consumers to be able to interact with us the way they want to, not the way that we used to legislate to them. And that's what they told us over and over again. Very profound and really telling about what's next. I think now we go to part 4. All right.
All right, so when we think about the 5 actions to take, I'm going to share the first 3, and then Joe is going to share the rest. And then we're going to take your questions. I think we might have 2 or 3 minutes left to take those questions. So if you haven't posted your questions in the question box, please do so. If you haven't, or if you can hit us on Twitter, I put those back again in the chat box, so make sure you hit us there. And let's talk about what to do now. So Joe, don't go anywhere, because I want to talk to you about number 1. So the first action we came up with when we looked at the data and went through how to apply it to our various clients was develop an omni-channel self-service strategy where your customers can seamlessly conduct interaction with you on one channel and pick up where they left off on another without having to repeat themselves. Joe, can you do the share the hotel example? I mean, to me, that is just like, it just explains this in a way that I just can't wait to see this everywhere. The person driving, calling the hotel to make a reservation.
Yeah, so one of our customers quickly, they're on the phone, they're on their mobile phone making a hotel reservation, and because of a bad cell zone, their call got dropped. Using, existing technology, we actually take and keep in what we call a context cookie. Sounds pretty fancy, right? But ultimately, we save that data. From that data, we're able to, since we know your mobile phone and we were talking to you, we can actually text you back and ask you, or we could call you back or schedule a call back. When we make this contact with you, we actually start where you left off in the middle of that reservation. So you never have to sort of reintroduce yourself, give your customer number, go through all that data that you already spent the time to actually enter into the system. We capture it, we start the conversation from there, and we actually treat you like we actually know who you are, and we care about what you are doing, and we want to save you time. And so this idea of how you were talking to me, it shouldn't matter, right? Every one of those channels, which actually I don't think consumers even know what a channel is, every different way you would interact with me should carry forward. And that is a priority, and I think all of us should have that as a design point. Don't make me repeat anything I've already told you, or maybe I'll scream, which is one of the pieces of finding we came out of this with, right?
That's exactly what the findings. All right, number 2, shop yourself as if you were a millennial. This, to me, is one of the most enlightening experiences. We do this a lot with clients when we work with them to go down that purchasing pathway. So we'll say to them, okay, you've shown up at your retail outlet or you're going to interact with customer service. Imagine that you did not want to talk on the phone. How would you go through this experience? Imagine that you don't want to queue up in a line and look somebody in the eyes. How would you go through this experience? And for some of them, it's so far-fetched, it's so out there and so uncomfortable, we say, okay, no problem. Bring your kids or get some millennial employees to physically go through the experience of trying to get a problem resolved or trying to get a question answered, and then let them report back to you on what worked and what didn't. You go through it with them. I mean, it is a really powerful thing when you humanize a purchasing pathway by putting yourself in the shoes of that generation. And then the third one, interact with customer service as if you were a millennial. What we say there is go find one very specific problem, pick a product, whatever it is, and try to solve it in the way a millennial would. Literally go and say, okay, I want to know, can this operating system work over here? Can I exchange this? Or is this available or is it out of stock? Whatever it is, pick something that's very specific. So the pathway is the broader kind of way that you would go down, the way you would travel to go and have an experience. Interacting with customer service and solving a problem is even more specific, and you'll find out that it's often even more frustrating for millennials. But doing those two things, going through the whole purchasing pathway, in particular with millennial, and then trying to get a problem solved in the way a millennial would, really is enlightening for other generations to be able to see what works and what doesn't. And you can often, I mean, it's right under your nose. It's just a matter of choosing to do that. So those three, I think, are really some high-level pieces that we can use. And then now I'm going to let Joe take back over to do the next slide and share numbers 4 and number 5 before we answer the questions. Hopefully you posted them now.
Yeah, so, we talk a lot about text as, a technology we're all comfortable with. We want to ask questions. One of the other, sort of big findings here and takeaways is probably not that surprising, which is that another way to communicate and to learn from is the video channel. And so what you'll see, I think, more and more, with the million, YouTube channels and 1 billion people using content like that, whether it be them or others, is really this idea of creating a set of videos, a video library that makes it easy to communicate to a consumer. Don't send them content that's hard to consume. I mean, it's easy to learn by using video. You can better engage and then share. And since it's so readily available and so easy to get to, it would be great if you sent out a product with a QR code on it that would link you to the videos that showed you how to assemble it, rather than sending some old-fashioned, mimeograph pieces of paper that are impossible to navigate. And so, we're starting to then make it easy to very quickly communicate to a consumer. And then the last one is that, if you think about what do you have to do differently to be able to sort of engage with, consumers, and how can you actually take customer service to the next level? I think that this is really the big sort of shift that's going to happen over the next 5 years, which is that if you can't actually talk to a person, if they don't answer the phone, if you can't engage with them that way, how will you communicate? And I think what we're seeing is this idea that we want to try to create conveniently accessible content. We want to, do what we call sort of the start with the know me, make things fit into my life, help me discover, know enough about me, engage with me, so that I can actually very easily and quickly resolve problems. Problems that really actually talk about more use, more engagement, more satisfaction. It's not going to be sufficient anymore just to sell people product. What we're going to have a responsibility to do is to provide enough capability so they can figure out how to use the product, and that's what part of customer service is going to be, and that's when we engage in this idea of self-service, using new technologies and tools, what we heard from the research is that everyone from millennials to baby boomers are ready for us to do better for them and give them a capability so they can actually become sort of, the best they possibly could be in the context of the solutions and products that we sell them. All right. I think we got through it in under an hour here, Jason.
Hey, 5 minutes left. Can we go to the next slide? Before we answer the questions, make sure you take note of this, everybody, if you haven't done so already. First, there's the Twitter for Aspect Software for myself, and then we share Joe's in the beginning, which is at THP Life. And then also, we're big and about living exactly what we talk. So you'll see my LinkedIn there and also Joe's. Feel free to shoot us an invite there or email us a question through LinkedIn. We love to connect with you and be of service with you however we can, and personalized service is important to us. And then at the very bottom, you'll see there is the link for the report. I know it's not a link that you can click on while we're in the webinar, but what I do want you to see is it's aspect.com/millennials, and you can download the entire customer experience index that Aspect put together, which really goes into even more of the questions. I know several of you have asked about that. So there's more of the questions answered in there along with analysis of the results. So make sure that you access that, and it's available to you. And then Tim is going to share with us 1 or 2 questions that I think we will have time to answer. And Joe and I will do our best to answer them here. If not, make sure to hit us again on Twitter or reach out to us through LinkedIn. All right, Tim?
Sounds good. The first one is from Andrea on Twitter. Her question is, how can personalized white glove service translate through self-service options?
Joe, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think that, what does white glove mean, right? White glove means actually I'm doing something where I'm treating you, probably almost better than you might expect. And I think that the way that we do this is in that beginning. Self-service doesn't mean we don't talk to you. What we want to do is set a context for knowing who you are. What are your preferences? Those preferences could be about the kind of content you want. Those preferences could be, the technologies that you want to use and the primary way of interacting with us. And so through this preference model, we can start to engage with you at a white glove level, even if it's self-service, because we make sure that every way that you want to interact with us is the way that we do that for you. So I think that the same concepts you would take to anything personal, we can use on the technical side to make sure that works in self-service.
Excellent. Here's another question. What's an example of a customer either one of you have talked to who's maybe not addressed some of the millennial preferences we talked about today?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. We work a lot in both the insurance space, financial services in general, and automotive, and we're seeing that a lot of the financial services firms that are not adapting to how millennials want to communicate are losing millennials when there's a transfer of wealth within the family. And so what that means is, you've had this person, this bank or financial advisor or whomever that has helped your family for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, really helps to solidify your place, right, if you're a millennial, but then that millennial doesn't feel like they can communicate with that financial advisor, for example, because they want to meet at their office or they want to have a phone call or whatever it is, or they're not on social media because they're worried about, not being able to understand the compliance rules. And so we see that many, many millennials are leaving when there is a transfer of wealth to go somewhere else to find somebody who's more like them. And I think that's one of those that because of the relationship involved, I think it's in particularly that industry is taking it very personally because these are people whose families they've helped for such a long period of time. But millennials they don't want to have to work to have a conversation or be able to communicate or get a question answered or find out some information. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're starting to see across various industries, which in some ways is serving, I think, as a very important wake-up call for the type of solutions that you guys offer. Because millennials, they just, they're not willing to work in order to get a question answered or build a relationship even. And I think that's so important on the customer engagement side. So that's what I've seen.
Thank you, Jason.
Joe?
Yeah, I don't know if we should be wrapping up here, Tim, or?
Yeah,
we can wrap it up.
Yeah, probably. We got probably less than a minute. Actually, we have no time left. Yeah, we probably should wrap it up here. Jason, Joe, thanks so much for your insight, your dialogue. Dynamic as usual. So thank you so much for your energy and the content you've shared today. This will be made available, the recording will be made available to all the attendees today. So thank you for those who contributed questions and comments on our Twitter feed. You will receive this, so thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.